3 weeks after the first battle, the war had transformed into something neither side had anticipated. The Council expected a short campaign to force human submission. Instead, they faced an enemy that refused to fight on their terms. Human forces did not mass for large battles. They struck logistics convoys carrying fuel and supplies. They destroyed communication relays that the Council needed to coordinate across vast distances. They appeared without warning, hit critical targets, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Every Council strength became a weakness. Their large fleets required massive supply chains. Human raiders targeted those chains. Their command structures relied on real-time communication across systems. Human jammers disrupted those communications. Their military doctrine was built on thousands of years of experience. Human tactics were being invented in real time, making them impossible to predict. On Earth, in secure research facilities, Soman barely slept. Her team worked around the clock developing new weapons and defensive systems. Every week brought new breakthroughs: adaptive camouflage that could fool Talvek sensors, quantum disruption fields that broke Quarren hive coordination, kinetic weapons with guidance systems that could track targets across incredible distances. The Council's technology is advanced, Soman explained to a visiting military delegation, but it's old. They perfected their systems centuries ago and stopped innovating because nothing challenged them. We're 30 years behind their baseline, but we're improving faster than they can adapt. She demonstrated a new weapon system, a missile that could split into dozens of smaller projectiles mid-flight, each one independently guided. Talvek's point defense is designed to track and destroy single large threats. They can't handle swarm attacks. We learned that from studying how Earth's own history. Sometimes the newest solution is just an old idea applied in a new way. The effects were showing. Council supply lines were becoming unreliable. Fuel shipments disappeared. Food supplies for troops vanished. Replacement parts for damaged ships never arrived. The massive military machine that had dominated the galaxy for centuries was learning that strength meant nothing if you couldn't feed it. In the Talvek's command center, Fleet Marshal Thexul stared at reports with growing frustration. "How are they doing this?" he demanded. "We have overwhelming numerical superiority. We control twice as many systems. Our technology is proven across millennia of warfare. Yet we cannot maintain basic supply security?" His intelligence officers had no good answers. Human ships were too small to carry supplies for extended operations, yet they seemed to operate indefinitely. Their communication systems should be easy to intercept, yet Council intelligence could not crack their encryption. Their tactics made no sense according to established military doctrine, yet they were devastatingly effective. "They're not fighting to win territory," one analyst finally said. "They're fighting to make us quit. Every day this continues costs us resources and credibility. They don't need to defeat us militarily, they just need to make victory too expensive." The political cost was indeed mounting. Smaller species within the Council were questioning why so many resources were being spent to force one species into compliance. Trade had declined across the galaxy as shipping became unreliable. The Council's promise of security and stability was beginning to look like a lie. Meanwhile, humanity prepared for something unprecedented. Admiral Minho gathered his command staff aboard the Unity, humanity's newest and most advanced warship. Around the table sat the best tactical minds Earth had produced: Hyunji, whose unconventional strategies had won battle after battle; Jihoon, whose logistics expertise kept human forces supplied despite operating far from home; Taehyun, promoted after his impossible maneuver had become standard operating procedure; and dozens more, all focused on one goal: Operation Open Door. Minho announced, activating the tactical display. 12 systems lit up, all deep in Council space. "We've spent 3 weeks proving we can defend ourselves. Now we prove we can strike anywhere. We hit these targets simultaneously, not to conquer but to demonstrate capability. We want them to understand that geography doesn't protect them anymore." The planning took days. Coordinating attacks across such distances required precision that no human force had ever attempted. Ships would need to jump through multiple systems, avoiding detection until the final moment. Timing would need to be perfect. One fleet arriving early would alert the others and ruin the element of surprise. But if it worked, the psychological impact would be enormous. The Council would realize that humanity could strike their core territories whenever they chose. Defense would become impossible without maintaining constant fleet presence everywhere. The cost of continuing the war would become unbearable. "Can we actually do this?" asked one of the junior officers. Yunji smiled. 3 months ago, they thought we couldn't defend ourselves. 2 months ago, they thought we couldn't disrupt their supply lines. Last month, they thought we couldn't coordinate fleet actions. We keep showing them they're wrong. Let's do it again. The strike forces departed over a period of hours, each ship taking a different route to avoid pattern recognition. They traveled through systems the Council considered secure, their new camouflage systems making them invisible to standard sensors. Some ships posed as civilian vessels. Others traveled through asteroid fields where no one expected military craft. A few simply relied on speed, jumping through systems so quickly that by the time alarms sounded, they were already gone. Suri, still embedded in Council intelligence networks, provided final updates on defensive positions. She was taking enormous risks now. Council security was investigating unexplained data access patterns. She covered her tracks carefully, but she knew discovery was only a matter of time. She sent one final message to Earth before wiping her systems and preparing to escape. The attack began at exactly the designated moment across all 12 systems. Human ships appeared simultaneously from different vectors, targeting military installations, supply depots, and communication hubs. They came in fast, fired everything they had, and retreated before organized defense could form. The Council's response was chaos. Fleets rushed to defend systems under attack, only to find the humans had already withdrawn. Pursuit was impossible because the attack vectors made no sense. How had the humans approached from directions that should have taken weeks to reach? How had they bypassed early warning systems that monitored every known approach route? For 6 hours, the Council's military infrastructure was in disarray. Commanders couldn't communicate with their superiors. Supply bases that had existed for centuries burned. Defensive installations that had never fired shots in anger found themselves under attack from enemies they couldn't track. The material damage was significant, but not devastating. Humanity didn't have the forces for true destruction. But the psychological impact was exactly what Minho had intended. The Council realized that their core territory was no longer safe, that humanity could strike anywhere, anytime, that no amount of defensive fortification could protect them from an enemy that appeared from nowhere and vanished like smoke. When human forces regrouped at designated coordinates, the casualty reports came in. Lighter than expected. A few ships damaged, none destroyed. Personnel losses minimal. The operation had worked almost perfectly. Now what? Taehyun asked aboard the Unity. Now we wait, Minho replied. We've shown them the cost of continuing this war. We've proven that military victory over humanity is impossible. Either they accept reality and negotiate as equals, or they escalate to total war. And if they choose total war, they know we'll make them pay for every system they try to hold. Across the galaxy, governments were having urgent discussions. The Council's authority had been exposed as limited. Species that had feared challenging the established order now saw opportunity. In quiet diplomatic channels, messages began arriving at human embassies that didn't officially exist. Offers of intelligence, trade agreements that bypassed Council control, and simple messages of respect from civilizations that had thought themselves powerless. In the Council chamber, Vexthal and Cluster 9 faced reality. They could continue the war, pouring resources into a conflict that was destroying their credibility and accomplishing nothing. Or they could negotiate, not from the position of strength they had assumed 3 months ago, but as equals facing an opponent who had earned respect through capability rather than submission. We must find a way to end this. Cluster 9 finally harmonized. The calculus has changed. Humanity cannot be contained through force. Continued conflict only weakens our authority over other species. We must adapt. Vexthal's pride fought against admission of defeat, but his political instincts were sharp. Then we negotiate, but not surrender. We find terms that allow both sides to claim success. The message went out through neutral channels. The Council requested formal negotiations, not to present terms to humanity, but to discuss terms with humanity. The difference in phrasing was subtle but profound. It represented a fundamental shift in how the galaxy viewed the newcomers from Earth. When the message reached President Jin Yong, he read it carefully before smiling. They're ready to talk. Really talk, not dictate. Send a message to Ambassador Daehyun. The emergency council session began within hours of the human delegation's departure. The chamber that had hosted the failed summit now held only the core powers. Smaller species had been dismissed. This conversation was for those with the strength to enforce their will, not those who simply followed orders. Supreme Chancellor Vex Thul paced before the holographic display showing human territory. Each green dot represented a colony, a station, or a military outpost. Taken individually, they seemed insignificant. But together, they formed a network that sprawled across a significant portion of the spiral arm. "This cannot stand," he said for the 10th time. "If we allow humanity to simply walk away, what prevents others from doing the same?" Cluster 9's bodies arranged themselves in a pattern that indicated deep calculation. Analysis shows 14 species currently under Council supervision that have sufficient population and resources to theoretically declare independence. Humanity's action has demonstrated that withdrawal is possible. The probability of copycat rebellions increases with each cycle we delay response. Then we respond immediately, said Fleet Marshal Thexul, military commander of the Talvex forces. He was a veteran of a dozen campaigns, his scales marked with honor scars from battles against pirates and rebels. "We mobilize the fleet. We strike their major colonies. We demonstrate the cost of defiance." Agreed, harmonized Warmind Cluster 17, the Quarren's military consciousness. Coordinated strikes on human military installations followed by occupation of key colonies. Once their defensive capability is eliminated, negotiations can resume from a position of strength. Plans began forming on the display. Talvex and Quarren forces would move together, an alliance of the galaxy's two greatest powers. They would hit humanity from multiple angles, overwhelming their defenses through superior numbers and coordination. It would be quick, decisive, and educational. Other species would see what happened when you defied the Council. What none of them knew was that every word of their planning session was being recorded. Deep in the Council's information networks, hidden within layers of security protocols, Suri had been working for 3 years. She appeared in all official records as a data analyst for a minor Talvex administrative department. Her cover was perfect, her loyalty unquestioned. She had even been granted access to military planning networks because her analysis of logistics data was so valuable. She was also one of the best intelligence officers humanity had ever trained. The Council leaders planned their attack. Suri carefully extracted the data: fleet movements, command structures, attack vectors, timeline projections. She had to be careful. Take too much data and the security systems would notice. Move too quickly and she would trigger alerts. So she worked slowly, pulling information one piece at a time, disguising her actions as routine analysis work. 3 hours after the planning session ended, she had everything. Coordinates where Council fleets would gather, routes they would take into human space, targets they had selected for their first strikes. And most valuable of all, the assumptions they were making about human defensive capabilities. She sent the data through a communication method the Council didn't know existed, a quantum-entangled relay that left no trace in normal space. The message jumped through multiple secure points before finally arriving at Earth's military command center. Admiral Minho received the intelligence personally. He immediately called his senior staff together and began analyzing the data. "They're moving fast," he said, highlighting the timeline. "First fleet mobilization in 18 hours. They expect to be in position to strike within 5 days. They're attacking along predictable routes," noted one of his tactical officers. "Standard doctrine. Mass forces overwhelm defenses, achieve quick victory." "Because they think they know what our defenses are," Minho said. "They're planning for the capabilities we showed them. The old technology, the standard tactics." He smiled coldly. "They're in for a surprise." The next 5 days were chaos disguised as routine. To any observer, human forces were reacting exactly as expected. Ships moved to defensive positions around major colonies. Weapon systems came online, shields activated. Everything visible, everything trackable. Everything exactly what the Council anticipated. But beneath that visible layer, other preparations were being made. Ships equipped with new quantum drives moved into position using routes the Council couldn't track. Weapon systems that had never been field tested were brought to full operational status. Communication networks using frequencies the Council had never imagined were established. And every defensive position that the Council knew about was quietly evacuated of essential personnel. The trap was set. The Council fleets arrived as predicted. 12 Talvex battle groups and 16 Quarren swarm formations. Thousands of ships carrying weapons that could crack planets. They came expecting minimal resistance, planning to end the conflict before humans could mount effective defense. They jumped into human space in perfect formation. Their sensors immediately locked onto human defensive positions. Everything was where their intelligence said it would be. The humans were defending exactly as predicted. This would be easy. Then the first wave of kinetic projectiles hit the Talvex lead ships. Not energy weapons that their shields could absorb. Not missiles they could shoot down. Just chunks of dense metal accelerated to tremendous speeds. Simple physics turned into devastating weapons. Shields that could turn aside laser fire meant nothing against solid matter moving at relativistic velocities. 3 battleships vanished in explosions before the Talvex could even identify what had hit them. Alarm spread through the fleet. Where had the shots come from? Their sensors showed nothing. The human positions they were targeting had not fired. Then human ships appeared. Not where the Council expected, but behind their formations. Ships that had somehow bypassed every sensor and traveled through routes that shouldn't exist. They didn't stay to fight. They fired, crippled key vessels, and vanished before the Council could respond. Warmind Cluster 17 tried to coordinate a response, but the Quarren hive mind relied on communication frequencies that suddenly became unreliable. Jamming technology they had never encountered disrupted their ability to coordinate. Swarm formations that should have moved as one became fragmented and confused. Captain Taehyun commanded the destroyer Indomitable, one of the new quantum drive vessels. His orders were simple: disrupt and demoralize. He brought his ship into normal space 3 kilometers behind the Talvex command carrier, fired a full spread of kinetic rounds into their engine section, and jumped away before they could return fire. The maneuver was considered impossible by Council military doctrine. Ships couldn't accurately jump that close to other vessels. The gravitational interactions would tear both ships apart. But human scientists had discovered that quantum calculations combined with faster-than-light fields created a temporary bubble that ignored normal physics. The Council had no defense against tactics they believed were impossible. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Council fleets retreated, having lost over 40 ships and damaged hundreds more. Human casualties were minimal. A few defensive stations destroyed, a handful of ships damaged, and no colonies touched. In the command center, Minho watched the retreating Council forces and knew this was just the beginning. "They'll be back," he said to his staff. "They can't afford to let this defeat stand. Next time they'll come with everything they have." "Then we'll be ready," replied Yunji, one of the tactical analysts whose strategies had been crucial to the victory. "We showed them they don't know us. Now they're going to be afraid of what else they don't know." Across the galaxy, news of the battle spread. The Council tried to suppress the information, but too many species had monitoring networks of their own. Within days, every civilization knew the truth. Humanity had not just survived the Council's attack. They had won decisively against combined Talvex and Quarren forces. In secret channels, messages began flowing between species that had never dared communicate before. Questions were asked. Plans were discussed. If humanity could defy the Council, what else was possible? The galaxy was changing. The Council's authority rested on the belief that resistance was futile. Humanity had just proven that belief was wrong, and once a lie is exposed, it can never regain its power. The Council would strike again, harder and with greater fury, but they would do so knowing they were no longer invincible, and that knowledge changed everything. The chamber filled slowly as the 6-hour recess came to an end. Delegates from across the galaxy returned to their seats, murmuring among themselves. Most assumed they knew how this would end. Humanity would accept the Council's terms with perhaps a few minor modifications to save face. That was how these things always went. The alternative was unthinkable. Ambassador Daehyun sat in the human section with Hyunwoo and Jiwon. His face showed nothing. No anxiety, no anger, no fear. He had received Earth's response 3 hours ago and had spent the time since then preparing. Not preparing arguments or negotiating positions. Preparing to do something that had never been done in the Council's 1,000-year history. Supreme Chancellor Vexthal called the session to order. His voice carried the confidence of someone who had never been denied. "The recess has concluded. Ambassador Daehyun, has your government reached a decision regarding the framework for peace?" Daehyun stood and walked to the center of the chamber floor. He carried no notes, no documents, no displays, just himself and the message Earth had sent. He looked up at the tiers of watching faces, thousands of eyes from dozens of species all focused on him, waiting for humanity's submission. My government has reviewed the Council's proposal thoroughly, Daehyun began. His voice was clear and steady. We understand the framework you have presented, the territorial restrictions, the supervised administration, the military limitations. We understand all of it, and, Vexthal prompted, already preparing his gracious acceptance speech, and we reject it. Completely, absolutely, without qualification or compromise. The chamber exploded with noise. Shocked gasps, angry shouts, confused questions all blended into a wave of sound that crashed against the walls. Delegates leaned forward in their seats, certain they had misheard. Some species had translators that needed to reset, convinced there had been an error in processing human speech. Vexthal raised his hand for silence. It took a full minute before the chamber quieted enough for him to speak. You reject it? His voice carried dangerous weight. You realize what you are saying? You would choose conflict over cooperation? Death over peace? We choose neither, Daehyun replied. We choose something the Council has apparently forgotten exists. We choose to be left alone. Cluster 9's bodies all shifted at once, a sign of deep confusion in Quarren body language. That is not an option. You exist in galactic space. You interact with Council species. You cannot simply opt out of the established order. We can and we do, Daehyun said simply. The Council's authority rests on consent. Humanity never consented. We never joined your Council. We never agreed to follow your laws. We never accepted your right to govern our actions. You have no authority over human space because we never granted you any. This is madness, Vexthal said, his composure cracking. Do you understand the military forces we command? The Talvex fleet alone could reduce your colonies to ash, and you would face not just us but the entire Council. Daehyun nodded toward Hyunwoo, who stepped forward and activated a portable display. Data began flowing across multiple screens, visible to everyone in the chamber. Coordinates, signal frequencies, surveillance protocols. These are the locations of every Council monitoring station in human space. Every listening post, every surveillance satellite, every hidden observer. We found them all 2 years ago. The data kept flowing. More coordinates, more frequencies. These are the Council intelligence networks throughout our colonies. The agents you thought were hidden. The informants you thought were secure. The backdoors you built into the communication systems you sold us. We found everything. Jiwon spoke for the first time, her voice professional and precise. As of 30 minutes ago, all of these assets began receiving shutdown orders. Your surveillance networks in human territory are being systematically dismantled. Your agents are being politely but firmly escorted to the border. Your monitoring stations are going dark. Alarms began sounding throughout Covenant's Edge. Council security officers rushed to terminals, their faces showing growing alarm. Messages flooded in from across the galaxy. Human forces were moving simultaneously across dozens of systems, all executing the same mission. Not attacking, just removing every piece of Council presence from human space. This is an act of war, Vexthal roared, rising from his seat. No, Daehyun corrected calmly. This is an act of sovereignty. You placed surveillance networks in our space without permission. We are removing them. You stationed observers in our territory without consent. We are sending them home. We are simply enforcing the borders you seem to have forgotten exist. You will regret this, Cluster 9 said, its harmonic voice now carrying a threat. We offer you one final chance. Accept the framework. Place yourself under Council protection, or face the consequences of your arrogance. Daehyun looked at the alien leaders, at the delegates watching from the tiers, at the holographic map, still showing the lines they had drawn through human space without asking. I speak now for every human colony, every human ship, every human being from Earth to the furthest outpost we have established. We do not accept your authority. We do not recognize your right to govern us. We will not place ourselves under your protection or control. He paused, letting the words echo through the chamber. Effective immediately, all human trade ports are closed to Council species. All diplomatic missions are recalled. All treaties and agreements that assumed Council authority are void. Humanity is withdrawing from galactic society under your rules. If you wish to interact with us in the future, you will do so as equals or not at all. You cannot do this, Vexthal said, but his voice now carried uncertainty. Around the chamber, Representatives of smaller species were watching with new expressions, not just shock but something else. Interest, hope, the dangerous idea that perhaps the Council's authority was not as absolute as everyone had believed. "We just did," Daehyun replied. He turned to his small delegation. "We're leaving. You will remain until dismissed," Vexthul commanded. Daehyun kept walking toward the exit. "We don't take orders from you." "We never did. You just assumed we would." Hyunwoo and Jiwon followed him. As they walked across the chamber floor, Council security officers moved to block their path. Daehyun stopped and looked at the guards calmly. "Are you planning to physically restrain diplomats from a sovereign species? That would be an act of war. Is the Council prepared for that?" The guards looked uncertain. They looked to their commanders, who looked to the Council leaders. And in that moment of hesitation, the power dynamic in the galaxy shifted. The Council blinked first. "Let them go," Vexthul said through clenched teeth. "For now." As the human delegation walked through the corridors of Covenant's Edge, other delegates rushed out to watch them pass. Some species looked terrified. Others looked stunned. A few looked at the humans with something approaching admiration. These newcomers had done what no one else had dared. They had said no to the Council and walked away. At the docking bay, their transport ship was ready. As they boarded, Jiwon finally allowed herself to show emotion. "Do you think they'll let this stand?" "No," Hyunwoo said. "They'll come for us. They have to. We've shown that their authority is built on consent, not power. Every contained species in the galaxy just learned they could say no." Daehyun took one last look at Covenant's Edge through the viewport. Inside that station, the Council was probably already planning their response. Plans would be made. Fleets would be mobilized. Threats would be issued. Then we'll be ready. Earth told us to walk out. Now we do the hard part. We proved that walking out was the right choice. The transport ship detached from the station and began its journey back to human space. Behind them, the Council chamber was in chaos. Delegates argued, shouted, demanded explanations. Vexthul and Cluster 9 were already meeting in private, forming the alliance that would bring humanity to heel. But they were making their plans based on old assumptions. They believed humanity was weak, that their technology was inferior, that their tactics were predictable. They believed humans would fold under pressure, that the reality of facing two great powers would terrify them into submission. They were about to learn they were wrong about everything. As the human ship jumped to faster-than-light speed, carrying news of what had happened, Daehyun allowed himself a small smile. The galaxy thought it knew humanity. They had watched humans for decades and concluded they understood them. But they had only seen what humanity wanted them to see. Now the truth would emerge, and the Council would discover that the greatest human trait was not their technology or their numbers. It was their absolute refusal to accept anyone else's definition of their limits. That refusal had taken humans from caves to the stars. Now it would take them beyond what the Council believed possible. The walkout was just the beginning. The emergency session began at midnight in Geneva. The room was secured against any form of surveillance, its walls lined with technology designed to block every known method of listening. Around the table sat the most powerful people on Earth, and every one of them looked worried. President Jin Young stood at the head of the table, his face illuminated by the holographic display showing the Council's proposed framework. He had barely slept since receiving Daehyun's initial report. The terms were worse than anyone had feared. Not just restrictions, but effective control over human expansion and military capability. "Let's be clear about what we're discussing," Jin Young began. "The Council is offering us a choice. Accept their supervision and live as a protected species, or refuse and face the combined might of civilizations that have ruled the galaxy for thousands of years." He paused. "Those are the options they believe we have." Fleet Admiral Minho was the first to speak. He was a career military man, his uniform decorated with medals from border skirmishes and defensive actions. "We've been running simulations for the past 3 months, ever since we learned this summit was being arranged. The numbers are not encouraging. The Talvex fleet outnumbers us 5-1. The Quarren can coordinate their forces through their hive mind in ways we cannot match. In a direct confrontation, we would lose. Then we surrender?" asked one of the civilian ministers. "We put our colonies under their administration and hope they treat us fairly? Has that ever worked?" The voice came from Yuna, the cultural historian who had been studying Council records for the past year. She was young compared to most people in the room, but her research had proven invaluable. I've examined the history of every species that accepted council protection. Within a generation, they lost control of their military. Within 2 generations, their governments became ceremonial. Within 3 generations, they were fully absorbed into either Talvex or Quarren space. Protected species is just another term for slow conquest. The room fell silent. Everyone knew Yuna was right, but hearing it stated so plainly made the situation feel more desperate. Salmon, the chief scientist, activated her own display. Complex diagrams filled the air, showing weapon systems and defensive technologies. However, she said, drawing everyone's attention, our projections assume the Council has accurate intelligence about our capabilities. They don't. Minho leaned forward. Explain. For the past 5 years, we've been conducting classified research in deep space facilities that the Council doesn't know exist. We've made breakthroughs in quantum shielding, kinetic weapons, and faster-than-light coordination systems. The Council believes we're still using technology from 30 years ago, because that's what we've shown them. They think they know our limitations. They're wrong, Minho said slowly, understanding dawning on his face. Completely wrong, Soman confirmed. They've been watching us through surveillance networks they believe are hidden. We found those networks 2 years ago, and have been feeding them carefully selected information. Every ship they've observed, every weapon they've cataloged, every defensive capability they've recorded is real. It's just not complete. Another minister spoke up. So we can fight them. We can hurt them, Minho corrected. We can make any attempt to force compliance so costly that they'll question whether it's worth it. But that still means war. That still means casualties on a scale humanity hasn't seen since the World Wars. There's another option, Jin Young said quietly, one that Daehyun suggested in his coded message. He activated a different display, showing the actual legal framework of the Council. The Council's authority rests on consent. Every species that joins agrees to abide by Council decisions. They have enforcement power because member species grant them that power, but humanity never joined the Council. We never agreed to their authority. They'll say we're bound by it simply by existing in galactic space, one of the legal advisors argued. They'll claim universal jurisdiction. Let them claim it, Yuna said, her eyes bright with sudden understanding. Claims require enforcement, and enforcement requires legitimacy. The Council has maintained order for so long because no one has questioned the foundation of their power. What if we simply refuse to recognize it? You're talking about walking away, said a military commander. Just leaving the table entirely. Not just walking away, Jin Young corrected. Withdrawing from their system completely. No Council ships in human space. No Council trade. No Council diplomacy. We close our borders and make it clear that their authority ends where human territory begins. The room erupted in arguments. Some called it suicide. Others called it the only honorable option. Voices overlapped as decades of military doctrine and diplomatic training collided with the simple, radical idea of complete sovereignty. Jin Young let them argue for 10 minutes, then called for order. We need to vote. But before we do, I want everyone to understand what each option means. If we accept the Council's terms, we survive. Our children will grow up in a galaxy where humanity is safe but controlled. We'll be protected and provided for, but we'll never be truly free. He changed the display again. If we refuse and fight, we'll face war. We have advantages they don't know about, but we'll still lose people. Ships will burn. Colonies might be destroyed. The cost will be measured in lives, not just resources. And the third option? Someone asked. We walk away, but we prepare for them to come after us anyway. We close our borders. We neutralize their surveillance networks, and we make it clear that any attempt to enforce their authority will be met with force. We don't declare war, but we make it clear we're ready for it. We bet that they'll back down rather than pay the price of forcing us to comply. Minho stood up. I've spent my entire adult life preparing for threats to humanity. I've studied every major military campaign in history. And I can tell you this. We've never won by accepting chains, even comfortable ones. We've won by refusing to surrender. By fighting when everyone said we couldn't win, by finding ways around impossible obstacles. He looked around the room. The Council thinks they know us. They've watched us for decades and concluded we're predictable. I say we show them they're wrong. Selman added her voice. My team has worked for years developing technologies that could change the balance of power. We didn't do that so we could hand control of it over to beings who think we need their guidance. We did it so humanity could stand on its own. I vote we use it. Yuna spoke last among the advisors. Every species in the galaxy has a story about why they joined the council. And every one of those stories starts with "we had no choice." I think humanity should write a different story. One that starts with "we chose to be free." The vote was called. It was not unanimous. Several ministers voted to accept the council's terms, arguing that survival was more important than pride. Others abstained, unable to choose between certain subjugation and possible destruction. But the majority voted for the third option: withdrawal, sovereignty, freedom, whatever the cost. Jin Young recorded a message for Ambassador Daehyun. His instructions were clear and specific. When the summit reconvened, Daehyun would deliver humanity's answer. Not the answer the council expected, but the only answer a free species could give. As the meeting adjourned, Minho approached Jin Young. "You know they'll come for us. The council can't allow open defiance. It would encourage every other species they've contained." "I know," Jin Young replied. "That's why you need to prepare for them." "How long do you need?" "If they come immediately, we're ready now. If they wait a month, we'll be much harder to break. If they wait a year," Minho smiled grimly, "then they'll regret it." Jin Young looked out at the night sky visible through the secured windows. Somewhere up there, on a neutral station between the stars, Ambassador Daehyun was about to walk into a chamber full of beings who believed they controlled humanity's future. Soon he would show them they were wrong. "Send the message," Jin Young ordered, "and give Admiral Minho everything he needs. We're about to find out if humanity's stubborn refusal to accept limits is a virtue or a fatal flaw." The message went out through encrypted channels, jumping through relay points that the council didn't know existed. It would reach Covenant's Edge in 3 hours, and then the galaxy would learn that humanity had made its choice. Not survival at any cost, but freedom at whatever price was demanded. The station hung in the darkness like a jewel suspended between stars. Covenant's Edge was built for moments like this, when the great powers of the galaxy needed neutral ground to meet. Its corridors were wide enough for the largest species to move comfortably, and its central chamber could hold thousands. Today it would host 3 delegations and determine the fate of billions. Ambassador Daehyun stepped off the transport ship and took a moment to observe his surroundings. The docking bay was already crowded with alien vessels. The Talvex ships were massive things, covered in golden plates that caught the light. The Quarren vessels looked organic, like they had been grown rather than built. Compared to these, the human ship looked small and plain, just a simple transport with clean lines and efficient design. Behind Daehyun, his 2 companions emerged from the ship. Hyunwoo carried himself like the military man he was, his eyes constantly scanning for threats and exits. Jiwon moved with quiet efficiency, already reviewing documents on her tablet. The 3 of them made up the entire human delegation. No servants, no guards, no elaborate entourage, just 3 people who would speak for their entire species. The reception committee was waiting. A tall Talvex official stood at the center, his scales shimmering green and gold. He looked down at the humans with barely concealed contempt. These newcomers had only been traveling the stars for a few decades. What right did they have to stand equal with civilizations that had ruled space for thousands of years? "Welcome to Covenant's Edge," the official said in perfectly translated Galactic Standard. "The chamber is prepared. The council awaits your presence." Daehyun nodded politely. He had spent months preparing for this moment, studying every detail of galactic protocol. He knew the Talvex expected him to seem nervous or overwhelmed. Instead, he simply followed the guide toward the central chamber. The walk through the station's corridors took 15 minutes. Along the way, they passed dozens of smaller delegations. Species from across the galaxy had come to witness this historic summit. Some watched the humans with curiosity, others with pity. Everyone knew what was about to happen. The council had summoned humanity to receive terms. The only question was whether the humans would accept gracefully or need to be convinced. The central chamber took Daehyun's breath away despite his preparation. The room was a perfect sphere, with the floor cutting across its middle. Seats rose in tiers all around, creating a bowl shape where thousands could watch the proceedings below. At the cardinal points sat the 3 main delegations. The Talvex occupied the northern position, their golden banners hanging above them. The Quarren filled the eastern section, their collective consciousness rippling through dozens of individual bodies. And now the humans would take the southern position. Hyunwoo leaned close to Daehyun as they descended to their seats. "It's a theater," he whispered. "Designed to make whoever stands in the center feel small. Then we won't stand in the center unless we choose to," Daehyun replied quietly. The opening ceremonies began with ancient rituals. A Talvex priest called upon the spirits of unity. A Quarren speaker hummed a frequency that made the air vibrate. When it was humanity's turn, Daehyun simply stood and bowed to the assembly. No speeches, no performances, just respect offered freely. The real business began when the lights dimmed and a holographic display activated above the center of the chamber. It showed a map of known space with different colors marking different territories. Talvex space glowed gold, Quarren space pulsed with soft blue light, and human space, the newest addition to the map, showed as small green dots scattered along one spiral arm of the galaxy. Supreme Chancellor Vexthul rose from his seat. His voice carried across the chamber without need for amplification. "We gather here in the name of peace," he began. "For too long our borders have seen conflict. Misunderstandings have led to violence. Resources have been disputed. Ships have been lost. The time has come to establish clear understanding between our peoples." Daehyun listened carefully to the words. They sounded reasonable on the surface, but he had learned to hear what was not being said. The Quarren Prime Speaker, a being called Cluster 9, spoke next. Its voice emerged from all its bodies at once, creating an eerie harmony. "The Council has prepared a framework for lasting peace, a structure that will allow all species to prosper under wise guidance. We have maintained galactic order for thousands of years. Our experience can guide younger species toward prosperity and safety." Now the holographic map changed. New lines appeared, cutting across human space. Sections were labeled with terms like protected zone and supervised territory. Daehyun felt Hyunwoo tense beside him. Jiwon had stopped taking notes and was staring at the display with obvious concern. Vexthul continued. "Under this framework, human expansion will be carefully managed to prevent conflict with established territories. Human colonies in disputed regions will be placed under joint administration. This will ensure peaceful coexistence and prevent any unfortunate incidents. Furthermore," Cluster 9 added, "human military capabilities will be assessed and regulated to maintain balance. We cannot allow destabilizing weapons development. The Council will provide security guarantees in exchange for transparency and cooperation." Daehyun stood slowly. All eyes in the chamber turned toward him. He walked down to the center of the floor, stepping into that space designed to make speakers feel small. He looked up at the tiers of watching faces, then at the holographic map floating above him. "I appreciate the Council's concern for peace," he said. His voice was calm and clear. "However, I noticed that this framework was prepared before humanity was consulted. These borders were drawn without human input. These regulations were written without human agreement." Vexthul's expression hardened. "The Council acts in the best interest of all species. Our experience spans millennia. Surely you do not suggest that humanity, having traveled the stars for mere decades, knows better than civilizations that ruled space before your ancestors left their caves? I suggest nothing except that decisions about human territory should include human voices," Daehyun replied. "And I notice that no species currently sitting on this council has ever accepted such limitations on their own sovereignty." A ripple of murmurs spread through the watching delegations. This was not how these ceremonies typically proceeded. New species were supposed to express gratitude for the Council's guidance, not question the terms being offered. Cluster 9's bodies shifted in their seats, a sign of agitation in Quarren body language. "You misunderstand the nature of this gathering. We are not here to negotiate. We are here to present the framework that the Council has already approved. Your role is to accept these terms and work within them." Daehyun looked at the map again, at the lines drawn through human space without permission. He thought about the message he had received from Earth before departing. He thought about the decision that had already been made. "I understand perfectly," he said. "I request a recess to consult with my government. Surely the Council can grant humanity a few hours to consider such important matters." Vexthul and Cluster 9 exchanged glances. This was an unusual request, but not unreasonable, and both alien leaders were confident of the outcome. Humanity had no real choice. They were surrounded by superior powers, outnumbered and outgunned. A few hours would not change mathematics. "Very well," Vexthul announced. "We will reconvene in 6 hours. Use this time wisely, Ambassador. The Council's patience is not infinite." but neither is it unreasonable. Consider carefully what rejection would mean for your people. Daehyun bowed again and returned to his delegation. As they left the chamber, Jiwon finally spoke. They have no intention of negotiating anything. No, Daehyun agreed. They intend to cage us with words and call it protection. They want us to be grateful for chains. Hyunwoo's jaw tightened. Then what do we do? Daehyun allowed himself a small smile. We do exactly what Earth told us to do. We show them that humanity does not ask permission to be free.